My name is Victoria Hamilton, and I'm 29 years old. Standing in my late husband's childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories and legal documents, I never imagined his own father would try to steal my future. After Daniel's tragic death in a car accident, my father-in-law Robert systematically blocked my access to family assets, thinking a grieving widow would stay quiet and disappear. He controlled every family meeting, excluded me from business decisions, and told everyone I had no rightful claim to what my husband left me. What Robert didn't know was that my husband had prepared me for exactly this situation, and the evidence I'd gathered would expose his greed in front of the entire family. Before we dive into this shocking family betrayal, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with difficult in-laws in the comments below. Have you ever felt excluded from family decisions that affected you? Please hit that like button if you're ready for a story about standing up to family bullies, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and vindication. Trust me, you won't believe how this family showdown ends. Growing up as Victoria Thompson in a middle-class Chicago family, I learned the value of hard work and integrity from my parents, who both worked in education. My father taught high school mathematics, while my mother was an elementary school principal. We weren't wealthy, but we were rich in love and strong moral values that would serve me well in the battles ahead. My career in marketing began right after college, and by 25 I had worked my way up to senior account executive at a prestigious advertising firm. I was attending a business conference in Denver when I first met Daniel Hamilton. He was presenting on sustainable construction practices, and his passion for both business success and environmental responsibility immediately caught my attention. Daniel was unlike any man I had ever met. While he came from significant wealth through Hamilton Construction Company, a multi-million-dollar family business, he was humble and genuinely interested in using his advantages to help others. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, covering everything from business ethics to our shared love of hiking and classical music. The Hamilton family wealth was substantial, but not ostentatious. Robert Hamilton had built the construction company from a small local business into a regional powerhouse specializing in commercial and residential developments. The family estate sat on 50 acres outside Denver, complete with a main house that looked like something from a magazine and several smaller buildings, including a guest house and Daniel's personal workshop, where he crafted furniture as a hobby. When Daniel brought me home to meet his family 6 months into our relationship, I was nervous but hopeful. Robert initially seemed welcoming, asking about my background and career with what appeared to be genuine interest. He was a tall, imposing man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made people listen when he spoke. His wife Margaret was elegant and soft-spoken, the perfect complement to her husband's more forceful personality. Our wedding 2 years later was held at the Hamilton estate, and it felt like a fairy tale. The ceremony took place in the garden with 200 guests, including business associates, family friends, and politicians who had worked with Robert over the years. I felt genuinely accepted into this accomplished family, and Robert's toast to our future happiness seemed heartfelt and sincere. During our first year of marriage, I began to notice the dynamics within the Hamilton family more clearly. Robert was unquestionably the patriarch who made all major decisions, from business matters to where the family would vacation. Daniel's siblings, James and Patricia, both in their 30s, had learned to defer to their father's wishes, even when they disagreed with his methods. Daniel was different from his siblings in that he had strong humanitarian instincts that sometimes conflicted with his father's purely profit-driven approach to business. While Robert focused on maximizing returns and expanding market share, Daniel advocated for sustainable building practices and fair wages for workers, even if it meant smaller profit margins. My own marketing career flourished during this time. I landed several major accounts and was promoted to regional manager, earning recognition in industry publications for my innovative campaign strategies. Daniel was incredibly supportive of my professional success, often bragging about my achievements to his family and friends. Our marriage was blissful for 2 wonderful years. We were planning to start a family and had begun looking at houses in Denver where we could build our own life while remaining close to Daniel's family. We shared dreams of traveling the world, starting a foundation focused on affordable housing, and raising children who would understand both privilege and responsibility. The tragedy that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. Daniel was driving home from a construction site when his car was hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. The impact killed him instantly, and my world shattered in ways I never imagined possible. At 28 years old, the love of my life was gone, and I was left to navigate grief while surrounded by his family's wealth and expectations. Robert handled all the funeral arrangements with military precision, and I was grateful for his take-charge attitude during those dark days when I could barely function. The service was beautiful, with hundreds of people sharing stories about Daniel's kindness and integrity. For a brief moment, I felt supported by the Hamilton family and hopeful that we could help each other through this devastating loss. The reading of Daniel's will took place 2 weeks after the funeral in Robert's attorney's office. Gregory Mills, the family lawyer who had known the Hamiltons for decades, explained that Daniel had left me the house we were planning to buy together, his personal belongings, and what seemed like standard spousal inheritance rights. However, the details of the family trust remained frustratingly vague. Gregory mentioned that the trust structure was complex, established by Daniel's grandfather, Chaum, decades earlier, with multiple layers of beneficiaries and conditions. He assured me that my rights would be fully explained once the initial grief period had passed, and everyone could think more clearly about financial matters. At the time, his measured approach seemed considerate and appropriate. Robert's behavior toward me began to change subtly in the weeks following the will reading. The warmth and concern he had shown during the funeral gradually gave way to a more businesslike, distant demeanor. Our conversations became shorter and more formal, as if I had somehow shifted from family member to outsider in his mind. The first red flag appeared during a family business meeting held at Robert's home office. For months, Daniel had been included in these discussions about company expansion plans and new development projects. I assumed that as his widow, I would have some involvement in decisions that might affect my financial future, but Robert made it clear that these matters were quite complex for outsiders. When I pointed out that I wasn't exactly an outsider, having been married to Daniel for 2 years and possessing a business degree and marketing experience, Robert's response was patronizing and dismissive. He said that managing a construction company required specialized knowledge that took years to develop, and that my grief made it inappropriate for me to be burdened with such complications. Margaret's behavior toward me also became noticeably cooler during this period. Where she had once included me in family social events and asked for my opinions on decorating and entertaining, she now seemed to tolerate my presence rather than welcome it. Her comments became subtly pointed, suggesting that perhaps I should consider starting fresh somewhere else instead of dwelling on the past. My attempts to understand my actual rights and benefits from the family trust were met with legal delays and bureaucratic runarounds. When I asked Gregory Mills for specific documentation about my entitlements, he said he needed time to review the complex trust language and promised to get back to me within a few weeks. Those weeks stretched into months, with no meaningful answers. Daniel had been 28 when he died, just 2 years away from his 30th birthday, which apparently had significance in terms of his inheritance rights within the family trust. Robert mentioned this several times always, in the context of how unfortunate the timing was, but never explained exactly what Daniel's reaching 30 would have meant for our financial security. The family business discussions that I was excluded from seemed to intensify during this period. James and Patricia would arrive at the estate for lengthy meetings with their father, and when I asked about the topics being discussed, I was told they were dealing with routine operational matters that wouldn't interest me. Robert began introducing a new family advisor, a financial consultant named Martin Walsh, who specialized in protecting family legacies and maintaining proper oversight of inherited assets. Martin was cold and calculating, and his presence at family gatherings made me deeply uncomfortable. He seemed to view me as a threat to be managed rather than a grieving family member to be supported. During increasingly uncomfortable family dinners, business matters would be discussed openly among Robert, James, Patricia, and Martin, but the conversation would stop abruptly whenever I asked questions or tried to contribute insights from my marketing background. The message was clear: I was no longer considered part of the family's inner circle. My first consultation with an independent attorney, Sarah Chen, opened my eyes to the possibility that my rights were being deliberately obscured. Sarah specialized in estate and trust law, and she explained that surviving spouses typically had significant protections under both state law and most family trust agreements. She recommended that I formally request copies of all relevant trust documents to understand my actual legal position. Robert's introduction of Martin Walsh as our family advisor became particularly troubling when I learned that Martin's previous clients had included families involved in contested inheritance disputes. His specialty seemed to be finding ways to minimize payouts to surviving spouses and other beneficiaries who might challenge family patriarchs' control over assets. The comfortable relationship I had enjoyed with Daniel's siblings began to deteriorate as they clearly felt caught between loyalty to their father and any lingering affection for me. James and Patricia started avoiding me at family gatherings, and when I directly asked them about decisions being made that might affect my future, they would defer to their father or claim ignorance about the details. The isolation was profound and painful. Not only was I grieving the loss of my husband, but I was gradually being cut off from the family that had once embraced me as a daughter. The message was becoming clear: Robert had never viewed me as a permanent member of the Hamilton family, and with Daniel gone, my usefulness had ended. The first formal notification that my access to family accounts had been temporarily suspended arrived by certified mail on a cold February morning. The letter, signed by Gregory Mills, explained that during the complex review process of trust distributions, certain precautionary measures were necessary to protect all beneficiaries' interests. The language was deliberately vague, but the impact was immediate and terrifying. What this meant in practical terms was that I could no longer access the joint credit accounts that Daniel and I had shared. The family investment statements stopped arriving, and my questions about monthly trust distributions were met with form letters about ongoing review processes. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt genuine fear about my financial security. Robert's explanation for these restrictions was carefully crafted to sound reasonable and protective. He claimed that the family needed to ensure full compliance with tax obligations and protect the business from any complications during this difficult time. And when I pressed him for specifics about what complications he was referring to, his answers became evasive and legalistic. During this same period, I discovered that Robert had been telling business partners and community members that I had no ongoing involvement in Hamilton Construction Company operations. At a charity gala that Daniel and I had attended together for 2 years, several people approached me with condolences and comments about how I must be moving on now that my connection to the Hamilton business had ended. These conversations were my first indication that Robert was actively working to sever any public perception of my role in the family enterprise. He was methodically erasing any suggestion that Daniel's death had left me with legitimate claims to family assets or business interests. The strategy was subtle but unmistakably deliberate. My formal request for copies of the trust documents that affected my interests was met with delays, legal technicalities, and demands for additional documentation. Gregory Mills claimed that certain portions of the trust were confidential and could only be disclosed under specific circumstances that had not yet been met. The bureaucratic barriers seemed designed to frustrate me into giving up. The family meeting where my role in future company decisions was formally questioned felt like a tribunal rather than a discussion among relatives. Robert James, Patricia Martin Walsh, and Gregory Mills sat around the conference table in Robert's home office while I was given a single chair facing them as if I were on trial for some undisclosed crime. Robert's presentation during this meeting was masterfully manipulative. He spoke about the need to protect Daniel's legacy and ensure that emotional decisions didn't compromise the company's stability. He suggested that my grief made me unsuitable for participating in complex business decisions, and that my unfamiliarity with construction industry practices could put the entire enterprise at risk. Margaret's suggestions that I should move on and start fresh elsewhere became less subtle during this period. She would make comments about young widows who had successfully reinvented themselves in other cities and would mention articles she had read about the healing power of completely new environments. The message was clear: the Hamilton family would prefer that I disappear entirely. When I attempted to access Daniel's office at the company headquarters, I discovered that the security codes had been changed, and I was no longer authorized to enter the building unescorted. The receptionist, who had known me for 2 years, was clearly embarrassed, as she explained that new security protocols required all visitors to be accompanied by a family member at all times. James and Patricia's discomfort with the situation became increasingly obvious, but their fear of confronting their father was stronger than any loyalty they felt toward me. When I privately asked Patricia about the family's plans and my role in them, she would only say that Dad knows what's best for everyone, and that I should trust the process. The introduction of potential buyers for portions of the company that I believed Daniel had part ownership in was the clearest sign yet that Robert intended to liquidate assets before I could establish any legal claims to them. Martin Walsh presented these potential sales as strategic restructuring necessary for the company's long-term health, but I suspected they were designed to convert my inheritance into cash that could be more easily hidden or redirected. Legal letters from the Hamilton family attorney began arriving regularly, each one suggesting that my claims were without merit and that my continued pursuit of family assets could be considered frivolous litigation, subject to penalties and sanctions. The intimidation tactics were sophisticated and frightening, clearly designed to discourage me from seeking independent legal counsel. My professional reputation began suffering as word of the family dispute spread through Denver's business community. Several clients expressed concerns about working with someone involved in family legal drama, and I could feel colleagues distancing themselves from what they perceived as a messy inheritance battle that might reflect poorly on their own reputations. The discovery that Robert had been consulting with other family members about handling the Victoria situation came through a casual comment from Margaret's sister during a chance encounter at a restaurant. She mentioned that Margaret had been stressed about the family business and hoped they could resolve things with Daniel's wife soon. The clinical way she referred to me as Daniel's wife, rather than using my name, was telling. The final insult came when I was denied entrance to the annual Hamilton Construction Company meeting, where major strategic decisions were made. This gathering had historically included all family members with financial interests in the business, but Robert's assistant informed me that this year's meeting was limited to active management personnel only. The message was unmistakable. I was no longer considered part of the Hamilton family in any meaningful sense. The decision to hire estate attorney Michael Torres was born from desperation and anger in equal measure. Michael specialized in family trust disputes and had a reputation for taking on powerful families who tried to cheat legitimate beneficiaries. When I first met him at his downtown Denver office, I was prepared for him to tell me that my situation was hopeless, but his initial assessment gave me the first real hope I had felt in months. Michael's first shocking revelation was that Daniel had updated his will just 4 months before his death, specifically including language designed to protect my interests in case something happened to him. This was not the action of a man who expected his father to treat his widow fairly, but rather someone who had concerns about exactly what was now happening to me. The discovery of hidden documents in Daniel's personal safe changed everything. I had completely forgotten about the small fireproof safe in his home workshop, but when Michael suggested we search for any personal papers Daniel might have kept separate from the family's legal documents, I remembered he had given me the combination as part of our emergency preparedness planning. Inside that safe were documents that proved Daniel had been far more aware of his father's character than I had realized. There were copies of trust agreements, business partnership documents, and financial records that Robert had claimed were too complex for me to understand. More importantly, there were Daniel's own notes expressing concerns about his father's intentions regarding my future security. The evidence that Daniel had been secretly documenting his contributions to the family business expansion was particularly valuable. He had kept meticulous records of the innovative construction techniques he had developed, the client relationships he had built, and the sustainable building practices that had won the company several lucrative government contracts. These contributions had significantly increased the company's value and profitability. Even more damaging to Robert's position were the audio recordings on Daniel's phone from conversations with his father about my future within the family. In one particularly revealing recording, Daniel explicitly told Robert that Victoria should be taken care of and have full access to everything that would have been mine if anything ever happened to him. Robert's responses on these recordings were evasive and non-committal, exactly the behavior of someone planning to ignore his son's wishes. Daniel's detailed notes about his father's pattern of controlling behavior with other family members revealed a history I had known nothing about. Robert's younger brother Thomas had apparently been systematically squeezed out of the business decades earlier, using similar tactics, delayed documentation, bureaucratic obstacles, and family pressure designed to force him to accept a fraction of his rightful inheritance. Michael's research into legal precedents gave us a strong foundation for challenging Robert's actions. Under Colorado state law, surviving spouses have specific protections that cannot be overridden by private family agreements, and many of Robert's tactics appeared to constitute breach of fiduciary duty and possibly fraudulent concealment of assets. The private investigator Michael recommended David Chen uncovered evidence of Robert's questionable business practices and tax strategies that went far beyond his treatment of me. There were patterns of underreporting income, overvaluing expenses, and shifting assets between different corporate entities in ways that seemed designed to minimize tax obligations and hide the true value of family holdings. David's investigation revealed that Robert had been meeting regularly with attorneys who specialized in defending against inheritance disputes. These were not the routine legal consultations of a responsible business owner. but rather the strategic planning sessions of someone preparing to fight challenges to his control over family assets. The documentation showing that Robert had been systematically undervaluing company assets to reduce trust payouts was particularly damning. Independent appraisals of company properties and contracts showed values 30 to 40% higher than the figures Robert had been reporting to beneficiaries. This wasn't just unfair, it was potentially criminal fraud. Michael's discovery that the family trust explicitly included surviving spouses as full beneficiaries made Robert's entire strategy legally indefensible. The trust language was clear and unambiguous. Daniel's widow was entitled to the same distributions and decision-making authority that Daniel himself would have enjoyed. Robert's attempts to exclude me were direct violations of his own father's legal intentions. The financial analysis prepared by Michael's accounting experts proved that my rightful share of the trust and business interests was worth over $2 million, not the minimal survivor benefits that Robert had suggested were my only entitlement. This wasn't just about principle anymore. It was about my entire financial future and the life Daniel had wanted to provide for me. As we prepared our legal strategy, Michael emphasized that this battle was about more than money. Robert's behavior represented a fundamental attack on Daniel's memory and intentions, and allowing him to succeed would encourage similar abuse of other family members. The evidence we had gathered was so compelling that Michael believed we could not only win, but also recover damages for the emotional distress and financial losses Robert's deception had caused. The decision about timing and approach became crucial as we planned our confrontation. Michael recommended that we present our evidence during a family gathering, where all members would be present, maximizing the social and psychological pressure on Robert, while ensuring that James and Patricia would witness their father's exposure as a fraud and manipulator. The preparation for confronting Robert required both legal strategy and emotional fortification. Michael Torres spent weeks with me reviewing every piece of evidence, anticipating Robert's likely responses, and preparing me for the psychological warfare that was sure to come. We knew that Robert would not surrender his control easily, and that the confrontation would likely be the most difficult conversation of my life. My emotional preparation involved coming to terms with the fact that the man who had raised the husband I adored was willing to steal from his own son's widow. Daniel had loved his father despite their disagreements, and exposing Robert's fraud felt like a betrayal of that love. Michael helped me understand that honoring Daniel's memory meant fighting for what he had wanted me to have, not protecting the man who was defying his wishes. Gathering character witnesses who could testify to Daniel's intentions and my role in his life became a crucial part of our strategy. Daniel's business school roommate, Marcus Williams, had been present for many conversations where Daniel expressed his concerns about his father's controlling nature and his determination to protect my financial security. Marcus was willing to testify about Daniel's specific statements regarding my inheritance rights. The financial expert analysis proving my rightful share was worth over $2 million gave us concrete numbers to present during the confrontation. This wasn't about vague trust distributions or complex legal interpretations. It was about specific assets that belonged to me under both the trust agreement and Colorado state law. Having precise figures made Robert's deception quantifiable and undeniable. Our legal strategy session focused on the timing and approach that would maximize our chances of success. Michael recommended that we confront the family during their traditional Thanksgiving gathering, when all members would be present, and the holiday atmosphere would make Robert's defensive tactics seem particularly inappropriate. The contrast between family celebration and his fraudulent behavior would be stark and powerful. The decision to invite neutral witnesses to the confrontation was strategically important. Pastor Williams from the family's church had known Daniel since childhood and could speak to his character and values. The family's longtime accountant, Patricia Newman, had access to financial records that would corroborate our evidence. Having respected community members present would make it harder for Robert to dismiss our accusations as family drama. My practice sessions for presenting the evidence calmly and effectively were emotionally exhausting but necessary. Michael recorded me making our case multiple times, helping me identify moments where my anger or grief might undermine the logical presentation of facts. The goal was to appear composed and reasonable, while Robert's responses revealed his desperation and dishonesty. The detailed presentation showing Robert's deceptive practices required visual aids and documentation that would be impossible for him to dismiss or explain away. We prepared binders for each family member containing copies of Daniel's recordings, financial analyses, and legal precedents that supported my position. The physical evidence would speak for itself, even if emotions ran high during the confrontation. My coordination with Daniel's business school friend Marcus proved invaluable because he had insider knowledge of both the construction industry and the specific innovations Daniel had brought to the family company. Marcus could testify to the measurable impact Daniel's work had on company profitability, making it impossible for Robert to dismiss his son's contributions as minimal or replaceable. The emotional support from my own parents became crucial as I prepared for a battle that would likely destroy any remaining relationship with Daniel's family. My mother flew in from Chicago to be with me during the confrontation, and having someone in my corner who loved me unconditionally gave me strength to face Robert's inevitable attacks on my character and motivations. The strategic decision to invite Pastor Williams and accountant Patricia Newman as neutral witnesses was designed to prevent Robert from controlling the narrative or intimidating other family members into silence. These respected figures would ensure that the truth came out regardless of family loyalty pressures, and their presence would force Robert to maintain some level of civility during his exposure. Our documentation of every instance where Robert had misrepresented my legal standing created a timeline of deception that would be impossible for him to deny. From the first vague explanations about complex trust reviews to the outright lies about my lack of inheritance rights, we had evidence of a systematic campaign to defraud me of my rightful inheritance. Michael's preparation for potential family backlash included strategies for handling emotional manipulation, guilt trips, and attempts to make me appear greedy or disrespectful of Daniel's memory. We anticipated that Robert would try to turn James and Patricia against me by claiming that I was destroying the family for money, and we prepared responses that emphasized my respect for Daniel's wishes above all else. The legal backup plan, in case the family meeting didn't resolve issues satisfactorily, involved filing formal court documents that would freeze family assets and force full disclosure of all trust-related financial information. While we hoped the confrontation would lead to a voluntary settlement, we were prepared to wage a public legal battle if Robert refused to acknowledge my rights. My realization that this battle was about more than money gave me the courage to face whatever consequences might come from challenging Robert's authority. This was about respecting Daniel's love and preparation for my future, standing up to a bully who had terrorized his own family for decades and ensuring that other potential victims wouldn't face similar abuse. The stakes were too high for me to remain silent any longer. The Hamilton family's traditional Thanksgiving gathering at the estate had always been an elaborate affair with 30 or 40 guests, including extended family business associates and close friends. This year, I arrived with attorney Michael Torres and a carefully prepared presentation that would expose Robert's deception in front of everyone who mattered to the family's reputation and legacy. Robert's initial reaction to seeing Michael enter the house was immediate shock, followed by barely controlled anger. He demanded to know why I had brought outsiders to a private family celebration, and his aggressive tone immediately set a hostile atmosphere that made other guests uncomfortable. His wife Margaret looked mortified by the confrontation developing in their own home. I had prepared opening remarks designed to be respectful, but firm, acknowledging the holiday setting, while making it clear that Robert's behavior had left me no choice but to address these issues publicly. I began by expressing my love for Daniel and my respect for the Hamilton family traditions. Then explained that I had discovered evidence of systematic deception regarding my inheritance rights that needed immediate resolution. Michael's presentation of Daniel's original will and trust documents began with the most damning evidence: the audio recordings of conversations between Daniel and Robert, where Daniel explicitly discussed his concerns about my future treatment and his father's promises to honor his wishes. The room fell completely silent as Daniel's voice filled the space, expressing love for me and worry about his father's controlling tendencies. The family's growing shock was visible as they realized the extent of Robert's deception and manipulation. James and Patricia had clearly never heard these recordings before, and their expressions showed genuine horror as they understood that their father had been lying to them about my legal status and their own brother's intentions regarding my inheritance. The financial documentation proving my rightful inheritance had been deliberately withheld, created a turning point in the room's atmosphere. When Michael presented independent appraisals showing that company assets had been undervalued by hundreds of thousands of dollars, several guests who understood business practices began asking pointed questions about Robert's management of family finances. Robert's defensive responses became increasingly desperate and contradictory as the evidence mounted against him. He first claimed that the recordings were taken out of context, then suggested that Daniel had been confused about legal matters, and finally resorted to attacking my character by suggesting that I was manipulating everyone's emotions for financial gain. Margaret's embarrassed silence as her husband's unethical behavior was exposed in front of their friends and extended family was perhaps the most telling reaction in the room. She had clearly suspected that Robert's treatment of me was wrong, but seeing the documented evidence of his deception seemed to shock even her. Several times she tried to get him to stop talking, but his desperation made him continue digging himself deeper. James and Patricia's horror at learning they had been complicit in cheating their brother's widow was genuine and immediate. Patricia began crying as she realized that her avoidance of me had contributed to my isolation, while James angrily demanded to know why their father had lied to them about the legal situation and Daniel's wishes for my treatment. Pastor Williams's moral condemnation of Robert's behavior carried significant weight because he had known the family for decades and had officiated at Daniel's funeral. His statement that deliberately defrauding a grieving widow violated every principle of Christian charity and family responsibility left Robert without the moral authority he had always claimed within the community. The family accountant, Patricia Newman's confirmation that Robert had been manipulating company valuations was devastating because she had been a trusted advisor for years and had no reason to lie or exaggerate. Her professional analysis of the financial records made it impossible for Robert to claim that the discrepancies were innocent mistakes or routine business practices. My emotional moment honoring Daniel's memory and his wishes for my security was the climax of the confrontation. I spoke directly about how much Daniel had loved his family, despite his concerns about his father's controlling behavior, and how betrayed he would feel knowing that his own father had ignored his dying wishes to protect the woman he loved. Robert's final desperate attempt to maintain control by threatening to disinherit James and Patricia if they supported me, revealed the toxic dynamics that had controlled the family for decades. His willingness to use financial intimidation against his own children in front of witnesses showed everyone present exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. The family's united stand against Robert's tyrannical behavior represented the first time in decades that anyone had successfully challenged his authority. James announced that he would support my claims regardless of the consequences, while Patricia stated that she was ashamed of her father's behavior and would testify on my behalf if necessary. The legal settlement agreement that Michael had prepared was signed that evening after Robert realized that continued resistance would only result in criminal fraud charges and public humiliation in court. The document required him to provide full restitution of my withheld inheritance, restore my access to all family accounts and benefits, and acknowledge my status as a full beneficiary of the family trust. The community witnesses to Robert's exposure ensured that the truth about his character would spread throughout Denver's business and social circles. Several guests mentioned that they would need to reconsider their business relationships with Hamilton Construction Company, given what they had learned about Robert's willingness to defraud his own family members. Pastor Williams concluded the evening by leading a prayer for family healing and forgiveness, but his words made it clear that reconciliation would require genuine repentance and changed behavior from Robert. The spiritual authorities' implicit condemnation of Robert's actions would follow him throughout the religious community, where the Hamilton family had been prominent members. The immediate aftermath of our Thanksgiving confrontation brought a mixture of relief, vindication, and unexpected complications that I hadn't fully anticipated. Robert's grudging compliance with the legal settlement agreement was swift but cold, as he clearly resented being forced to honor his son's wishes and my legitimate inheritance rights. Within a week of signing the settlement, I received full access to my rightful inheritance and trust benefits, including the $2.1 million in assets that Robert had attempted to conceal or redirect. The financial security this provided was overwhelming after months of uncertainty and fear about my future, but the emotional cost of the battle had been enormous. The restoration of my access to family accounts and business information revealed the full extent of Robert's deception. Bank statements and investment reports showed that my trust distributions had been accumulating in restricted accounts for months, earning interest that Robert had planned to claim as administrative fees. The systematic nature of his fraud was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. James and Patricia's apologies for their complicity in their father's behavior were sincere but couldn't undo the months of isolation and betrayal I had experienced. Patricia wept as she explained how their father had convinced them that supporting me would destroy the family business and dishonor Daniel's memory. James admitted that he had suspected his father was lying, but had been too cowardly to challenge him. Margaret's private apology was perhaps the most meaningful because she admitted that she had known Robert's actions were wrong from the beginning. She explained that decades of marriage to a controlling man had taught her to keep quiet rather than challenge his decisions, but seeing my suffering had made her realize that her silence had enabled his abuse of others. The decision about my ongoing role in the family business required careful consideration of both financial and emotional factors. While I now had legal rights to participate in company decisions, the toxic atmosphere Robert had created made it clear that working closely with him would be impossible. Michael suggested that I could maintain my ownership stake while limiting direct involvement in daily operations. My choice to establish the Daniel Hamilton Memorial Foundation, using a portion of my inheritance, felt like the perfect way to honor my husband's humanitarian values while creating something positive from our painful ordeal. The foundation would focus on affordable housing development and sustainable construction practices, causes that had been dear to Daniel's heart. The restoration of my professional reputation happened more quickly than I had expected. Word spread through Denver's business community that I had been the victim of inheritance fraud, rather than a greedy widow trying to steal from my husband's family. Several clients who had distanced themselves during the controversy reached out to apologize and restore their business relationships. The new boundaries I established with Robert were necessary for my emotional health and safety. While we would remain in contact regarding family business matters, I made it clear that our relationship would be strictly professional and that any attempts at manipulation or intimidation would result in immediate legal action. James and Patricia's growing understanding of their father's manipulative patterns created an opportunity for genuine healing within the family. They began sharing stories about other instances where Robert had used emotional manipulation and financial control to get his way, and they expressed gratitude for my courage in finally standing up to his abuse. My personal growth through the experience of fighting for myself in an impossible situation was profound and unexpected. Before Daniel's death, I had never imagined that I would be strong enough to challenge a powerful man like Robert Hamilton, but discovering my own courage and determination changed my self-perception in positive ways. The recognition that Daniel's love and preparation had given me the tools I needed to protect myself brought a sense of peace that had been missing since his death. His careful documentation of family finances and his explicit statements about my inheritance rights had been acts of love that continued protecting me even after he was gone. My decision to remain connected to the Hamilton family while maintaining complete independence reflected my commitment to honoring Daniel's memory without sacrificing my own well-being. James and Patricia deserved the opportunity to rebuild our relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, free from their father's manipulative influence. The deeper bonds that formed with Daniel's siblings as they learned to see their father clearly were unexpected but welcome. Our shared experience of Robert's manipulation created a foundation for genuine family relationships based on truth rather than fear and intimidation. The annual memorial service we established at the foundation brought the family together in Daniel's honor while focusing on the positive values he had represented. Even Robert attended these gatherings, though his presence remained uncomfortable, and his participation was minimal and grudging. My gradual opening to the possibility of future happiness represented the final stage of my healing journey. While I would always love Daniel and treasure our time together, the strength I had discovered through fighting for our shared future gave me confidence that I could build a meaningful life that honored both his memory and my own dreams. The reflection on what I had learned through this ordeal brought clarity about the difference between family loyalty and enabling abuse. True loyalty to Daniel's memory meant protecting the future he had envisioned for me, not accepting mistreatment from someone who claimed to love him while ignoring his explicit wishes. Sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones we most need protection from, and recognizing that truth is essential for our own survival and growth. Standing up for what's right isn't about money or assets. It's about honoring the love and trust of those who believed in us and wanted us to thrive even after they're gone. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was using family loyalty to manipulate or control you? How did you find the courage to fight for what was rightfully yours when it meant confronting people you cared about? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else facing similar family manipulation. If this story inspired you to think about the difference between real family loyalty and toxic control, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life tales about finding strength in impossible situations. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of standing up for yourself, even when it's family trying to take advantage of you. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that grief doesn't make you weak, it can make you fierce when fighting for what the people you love would have wanted. Wishing you all the courage to honor the trust that others have placed in you, and the wisdom to recognize when protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do.